The courtroom froze the moment Malcolm Reeves laid his FBI badge on the judge's bench. The officers who had mocked his silence the day before went pale, their smirks vanishing as the truth hit like a thunderclap. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of who he was said everything. It was 10:42 p.m. on a Thursday when the red and blue lights flared behind the silver rental, cutting through the humidity just outside Biloxi, Mississippi. Malcolm Reeves, 46, didn't flinch. He signaled ease the car to the shoulder and placed both hands calmly on the wheel. The stretch of road was dark, no street lamps, just the occasional hum of insects and the steady blink of hazard lights. He waited. No sudden movements, no calls, no reaching. He'd been down too many back roads in too many small towns to forget how quickly things could turn. Two patrol cars had boxed him in excessive for a turn signal violation, but he didn't ask questions. The first officer approached fast flashlight already aimed at Malcolm's eyes. Bald, tense, angry, before a word was spoken. "License and registration," he barked. Malcolm's voice was even. "May I ask the reason for the stop? You didn't use your blinker changing lanes," the cop said, voice sharp like he'd just been challenged. Malcolm handed over his license quietly. "I believe I did. That was enough." The second officer, a stockier man with a smirk in his voice, appeared on the passenger side. "Where you headed, can't say. Can't or won't, federal protocol," Malcolm answered. That word federal landed like a punch to the ego. The bald officer leaned in. "You giving us attitude, no, sir?" Malcolm said, still polite, still steady. "I'm just asking if this is a lawful stop." That was it. No cursing, no resistance. But it didn't matter. They yanked the door open, dragged him from the car, forced him face down in the gravel. One knee to his back, one hand twisting his wrist upward. He didn't shout, didn't plead. His face pressed against the shoulder of the road, eyes focused on the dirt as they cuffed him. Refused to comply, one of them radioed in. They never asked about the ID in his wallet, never questioned why a man from Montgomery, Alabama might be in Mississippi dressed in plain slacks, wearing an unassuming gray jacket with a small shield-shaped bulge stitched into the lining. They drove him to the station, scribbled out a half-page arrest report, booked him without reading his rights, and placed him in a holding cell with flickering lights and a toilet that wouldn't flush. No phone call, no explanation. Just a single remark from the officer with the shaved head. "You'll have time to talk in court." He sat there all night, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees, silent. By morning, the courtroom smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Judge Carlton Merritt glanced up from his bench glasses hanging low on his nose. He didn't look twice when the bailiff called out Malcolm Reeves. A few heads turned. Two officers in the back row chuckled. "That's him," Beck muttered. "Probably one of those fake sovereign types. Thinks he's above the law. Watch, he'll start quoting the Constitution like it's a get-out-of-jail-free card." They laughed. Loud enough for Malcolm to hear. He walked in alone. No lawyer, no folder, no urgency. Just calm, deliberate steps up the center aisle. The courtroom wasn't crowded. A few clerks. One bored public defender. A reporter scribbling in a notepad without looking up. Judge Merritt glanced at the file. "Mr. Reeves, you're being charged with failure to comply during a lawful stop. Is that correct?" "That's what the report says," Malcolm replied. "I see you have no counsel present." "I don't need one." Chuckles from the back again. The judge glanced at the officers but said nothing. "This appears to be a minor infraction," Merritt continued. "Should be quick. Anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" Malcolm stepped forward slowly, reached into his coat. The bald officer shifted in his seat, hand twitching toward his belt. Malcolm paused, then drew a slim, laminated badge and laid it flat on the bench. "My name is Malcolm Reeves," he said, "Director of Internal Affairs, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room went still. The judge stared at the badge. No blink, no sound. The officer's laughter stopped cold. Beck leaned forward like he'd seen a ghost. "You're with the FBI?" the judge asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Internal Affairs," Malcolm answered. "I oversee misconduct reviews for the Southeast, including departments with body cams that mysteriously malfunction during traffic stops." The courtroom could have been underwater. A clerk, Darlene, white blouse, reading glasses, stood slowly. "Your Honor, would you like me to verify the credentials?" "Please," the judge said, a little too fast. She stepped out. Malcolm didn't move. just stood there, gaze locked on the judge, saying nothing. He didn't look at the officers. He didn't need to. Darlene returned minutes later, notepad in hand. Confirmed, she said, not even glancing at the cops. Internal Affairs, 22 years. Southeastern Division. The air in the room shifted again. The judge leaned back, visibly rattled. Mr. Reeves, I assume you have something further to request. Yes, Malcolm replied. I'm requesting all charges be dismissed immediately, and both officers placed on administrative leave, pending federal inquiry. Beck stood up. Wait, what, you're suspending us for a traffic stop you didn't know who he was? The judge offered weakly. Malcolm turned to face the officers. Not with anger, just clarity. You didn't ask. Denton spoke for the first time. Look, we made a mistake, all right. If we'd known you were Malcolm, raised a hand. That's the problem. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The room was already changed. What started as a routine citation ended with silence, the kind that doesn't fade, that lingers like a truth everyone already knew, but never said out loud. Malcolm picked up his badge, slid it back into his coat. He turned to the judge one last time. This wasn't about proving a point, he said. It was about showing what happens when power assumes it can act without accountability. I had a badge, I had training, I had options. Most people don't. He left the courtroom without looking back. The judge scribbled something hastily on the case file. The officers didn't move. Outside, the morning was hot, humid, the kind of air that clung to your skin and made truth impossible to shake. Malcolm walked back to his rental, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel. He didn't drive. He just sat for a long moment, eyes forward, breath steady. He'd been on the road for 6 days, visiting departments flagged for irregularities. He had 5 more to go. This was never personal. It was always the job. But jobs like his carried a weight most people never saw. He picked up his phone and typed a short message, Biloxi stop complete. Initiate full review. He hit send. Then he looked in the mirror. Not at his reflection, but at the back seat. The files stacked there. The patterns waiting to be confirmed. This stop was just the beginning. Malcolm Reeves didn't leave town. Not yet. After the courtroom doors closed behind him, after the murmurs faded, and the judge's face disappeared in a haze of red embarrassment, Malcolm drove 3 blocks to a nondescript motel off Highway 90. He checked in under his real name, used a secure laptop, and began uploading notes. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't even satisfied. That morning's courtroom moment, where laughter turned to silence, where uniforms stiffened and power shrank, wasn't a climax. It was a trigger. That stop hadn't been an isolated mistake. It had been a symptom, a clue. One Malcolm had seen a dozen times in half a dozen towns, just like Biloxi. Body cams that magically fail. Officers whose reports forget their own aggression. Departments where race and compliance always seem to clash. He opened a manila folder marked Jefferson County PD. Flagged incidents. The same department that cuffed and dragged him was already under informal review. What had happened to him wasn't just ironic, it was predictive. That night, he sent an encrypted summary to Washington. The next morning, he met his team at a neutral satellite office in Gulfport. Grace Mendoza was already inside sharp suit, no nonsense. Her reading glasses balanced perfectly on the bridge of her nose as she scanned policy documents like they were suspect statements. Nathan Cole arrived moments later, earbuds and sipping cheap motel coffee, and carrying 3 flash drives marked Redacted Training, JC. Neither needed small talk. Malcolm greeted them with a nod and dropped a USB into Grace's hand. Vehicle mic caught audio. Enough to confirm escalation. We'll start there. Grace didn't blink. I've requested their use of force policy. Training records are a decade out of date. Looks like someone's been recycling PDFs. I'm pulling badge logs, Nathan said. One of the arresting officers, Denton, accessed the server twice post-arrest. Timestamp between midnight and 5:10 a.m. Deleting footage, Malcolm asked. And access logs, Nathan replied. Sloppy or arrogant, Grace added. They never thought anyone would ask. By 2 p.m., they arrived at the station. Malcolm didn't ask for a welcome. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked through the main entrance, badge on display, credentials already verified. Sheriff Byron Keyes met them outside his office. He looked exhausted, gray hair thinning at the temples, tie, loosened an expression somewhere between caution and shame. "Agent Reeves," he said with a tired nod. "Wasn't expecting you back so soon." "I wasn't expecting to be arrested during a routine review," Malcolm replied, voice even. "We'll need a room. Unoccupied, secure, close to your records division." Keyes opened his door without a word. Deputy Sloan Marlowe was already there, standing near the back wall, arms crossed. Malcolm noticed her eyes. Observant. Steady. Not defensive like the others. She didn't flinch when he spoke. "You knew something was wrong," Malcolm said. "Didn't you?" "Yes," she answered, "but I didn't know how bad." Malcolm handed her a printed list. 23 complaints flagged in the last 18 months. Of those, 0 resulted in formal investigation. 18 cited body cam failure. She scanned the names. Her brow tightened. Most of these never even made it past intake. "That's the point," Grace said, entering behind them. "You don't have to bury misconduct if you make sure no one's digging." Over the next 5 hours, Malcolm and his team combed through hard drives, reviewed outdated memos, and cross-checked badge activity with vehicle logs. Nathan recovered partial camera backups from patrol cruisers that weren't supposed to be storing anything. One contained a minute of choppy audio, just enough to catch the tail end of Denton's voice barking. "Step out," now followed by the unmistakable sound of someone hitting gravel. The IT specialist, a quiet man named Brian, who rarely spoke above a murmur, pulled Malcolm aside mid-afternoon. "Someone's been wiping logs from inside the building," he whispered. "I traced the activity. It was Denton. Twice. Once the night of your arrest, again the morning after." "Can you print it?" "Already did." Malcolm took the envelope, thanked him, and slid it under Grace's folder. Meanwhile, Sloan was pulling archived complaints from locked cabinets, ones marked as resolved, but never followed up. "It's always the same language," she said. Subject was non-compliant. Subject was verbally aggressive. No audio, no footage, just officer statements. "Patterns matter," Malcolm replied, "even when no one admits them." Sheriff Keyes returned after sunset, looking older than he had that morning. "You've been in my station all day," he said. "What are you building toward?" Malcolm set the audio clip on the desk. Then the log files, then the complaint summaries. "A pattern," he said, "of falsified documentation, of willful neglect, of racially biased enforcement." He looked the sheriff in the eye. "And I'm shutting you down." Keyes' voice dropped. "You're suspending my department field operations only," Malcolm clarified. "Your dispatch remains open. Emergencies will be handled. But as of now, Jefferson County PD is under federal compliance hold. Do you know what that will do to us?" "Do you know what already has?" Malcolm said. The room was still. No yelling. No defense. Just a slow exhale from the sheriff as he sat heavily behind his desk. "We'll cooperate." "You'll do more than that," Grace said. "You'll produce updated training within 48 hours. You'll submit complaint logs for re-review. And you'll hand over Officer Denton's badge and service weapon." Nathan was already transferring the drive contents to federal storage. Sloan looked at the growing pile of evidence and said nothing. Her silence didn't mean she was unmoved. It meant she was watching everything. That evening, as Malcolm stepped into the hallway, a young officer turned his back quickly, pretending to be on a call. 2 others stood frozen near the water cooler, their earlier swagger gone. Tampering logs, deleted videos, manipulated reports. A whole culture built on avoiding accountability. But the thing about silence was it didn't stay quiet forever. Not when someone finally showed up willing to listen to it. Malcolm walked to the back of the station and stood outside in the fading light. His phone buzzed. It was the compliance unit from D.C. "What's the update?" "It's systemic," Malcolm replied. "We've got files, logs, 1 audio clip, and an officer who thought deleting data meant deleting consequence." "What's your move?" "We just made it." He hung up. Inside, Nathan cloned the last of the server data. Grace compiled summaries of every violation found. Sloan gathered more reports now with full access. And Sheriff Keyes, somewhere behind that door, sat with his elbows on the desk, no longer wondering if his department had a problem. He knew it had a reckoning, and it had arrived. The station was quieter the next morning. Not silent, just careful. Conversations behind closed doors. Eyes that didn't hold your gaze as long. A few officers sat at their desks, pretending not to scroll news articles on their phones. But the headline was everywhere: FBI agent detained by Jefferson County Police Body cam footage missing. The clip from the patrol car mic, just 61 seconds of gravel force and the phrase federal protocol, was already playing on regional stations by sunrise. Grace Mendoza stood in the hallway outside the records room with a hard copy packet in hand, flipping through pages, like she already knew how the story ended. Nathan was back in the server room pulling backups they'd been told didn't exist. Sloan Marlowe had just finished briefing Malcolm on another incident from 6 months prior. Same officer, same language, another lost file. Sheriff Byron Keyes hadn't said much since the hold took effect, but his silence wasn't stone. It was surrender. Malcolm didn't waste time. That morning, he walked into a community already boiling just under the surface. The town hall was scheduled for 5 p.m. They announced it at 10 a.m., and the chairs were already being set out by noon. Word spread fast when people were ready to speak. By the time Malcolm arrived, the room was full students in backpacks, mothers with toddlers, elderly men in ball caps, and pressed shirts, entire families who had never stepped foot in a public forum, now seated in folding chairs under flickering fluorescent lights. Malcolm stood along the back wall, coat folded over his arm, listening. He didn't bring a badge, didn't speak, didn't need to. The microphone passed from hand to hand. A teenager with braces and a football hoodie talked about being stopped walking home from practice. No ticket, just questions, just flashlights, just that look that said, "You don't belong here." A middle-aged woman stood next, voice, calm but tight. "I've lived in this town 23 years. I pay taxes. I run a small business. I've been pulled over 4 times in 2 months for nothing but existing after sunset." Then came the elderly man in the third row. He didn't raise his voice, didn't tell a long story, just said they cuffed me in '89. Never gave me a reason. I've never told anyone. Some people cried, some stared forward, arms crossed, pretending it didn't hurt to hear. Malcolm didn't move. Then Sheriff Keyes stood up. No microphone, just a quiet voice that somehow reached the corners of the room. "I've been in law enforcement 31 years. I've served this county longer than anyone in this building, and I failed you." He looked at Malcolm for a beat, then back to the crowd. "We didn't know who Mr. Reeves was when we stopped him. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is we didn't care who any of you were." The room didn't cheer. Not yet. They waited. "I've ordered all previously dismissed complaints to be reopened. I've granted full access to the DOJ's Internal Affairs Division, and I promise every officer involved in this pattern will be reviewed, including myself." Someone near the front shouted, "Talk is cheap." The sheriff nodded. "Then hold me to it." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief, it was something heavier, hope with caution. After the town hall, people lingered outside. The local news crew filmed over the crowd, careful not to get too close. Parents traded stories in low voices. Students looked at Malcolm and whispered without pointing. Back at City Hall, Malcolm Grace Sloan and Sheriff Keyes met behind closed doors with Mayor Harlan Boyd. 61 graying cautious and more politician than leader. He looked exhausted by the time Malcolm dropped the file on his desk. "These are your findings." "Preliminary," Malcolm replied. 5 confirmed policy violations, 3 counts of falsified reports, 2 instances of digital evidence manipulation, 1 active obstruction of a federal inquiry. Boyd ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Are you recommending charges?" Grace answered. "We're recommending a full personnel audit and immediate removal of Officer Travis Denton." "Denton's been here over a decade," Boyd said. "You're asking me to fire one of our most senior officers. I'm asking you." Malcolm said to stop protecting the reason this system's broken. Sloan leaned forward. "You can choose to protect a man who covered his tracks or a community that just stood up and demanded the truth." Boyd stared at the table. There was no statement he could write, no press conference he could hold that would fix what had been recorded, aired, and repeated across 3 counties. "You'll have your letter by morning," he said. They didn't thank him. The next day, Denton was called into Sheriff Keyes' office. It was short, 1 page, signed by the mayor. Effective immediately. Denton didn't argue. He stared at the paper for a long time, then looked up and said, "So that's it?" Keyes didn't blink. "You think it shouldn't be? I thought I was doing my job." "You weren't," Keyes said. "You were doing what you thought you could get away with." Denton left through the back exit. No badge, no weapon, no words. Later that week, Malcolm returned to the station not to oversee punishment, but to begin protocol reform. He met with Grace Nathan, two DOJ legal advisors, and a third-party oversight consultant. They drafted new departmental policies, mandatory body cam usage, regular digital audits, new training for de-escalation and racial bias, and independent public reporting system. Sloan was officially reassigned as liaison between the department and the oversight team. She didn't smile at the appointment. She just said, "It's about time." There were no balloons, no backpats, just binders, timelines, checklists, accountability. That evening, Malcolm walked through the town square. The sun was setting behind the storefronts. The light turned everything amber. Across the street, a group of high schoolers sat on the edge of a planter box. One of them, tall, lean, maybe 17, nodded at him as he passed. Not a salute, not fear, just acknowledgement. Malcolm nodded back. At the motel, he packed quietly. The folder marked Jefferson County now had a red stripe. Closed. His phone buzzed. A single message from the bureau. "Next location, ready when you are." He replied, "Send it." But he didn't leave just yet. He sat on the edge of the bed tie, loosened shoes still on letting the silence settle around him. He didn't feel triumphant. He never did. Because the point wasn't victory. It was exposure. This wasn't about who Malcolm was. It was about who they assumed he wasn't. He thought about the woman pulled over at night with her child crying in the back seat, the boy in the hoodie walking home from football practice, the man in the third row who'd carried a memory for 30 years with no one to tell. None of them had a badge. None of them got to place credentials on a courtroom bench. But now their stories were part of the record. And maybe that was enough. For now. Malcolm turned off the light, sat back in the chair by the window, and watched the square slowly empty. A town that could no longer pretend it didn't know. A system that could no longer claim it didn't need fixing. And one man still calm, still quiet, ready to go, wherever the silence next needed a voice. In a world where silence is often mistaken for weakness and appearances are judged before character, the story of Malcolm Reeves reminds us that integrity is not about the uniform you wear. It's about the choices you make when no one is watching. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek attention. But he demanded accountability through action, persistence, and quiet courage. Malcolm's experience shows us how dangerous it is when power becomes routine, when policies are ignored, and when systems stop seeing the humanity in the people they claim to protect. It took a man with a badge experience and federal authority to expose what so many in that town had been silently enduring for years. But this story isn't just about Malcolm, it's about every mother pulled over for no reason, every teenager questioned just for walking home, every citizen who files a complaint that goes unanswered. The lesson is clear. Accountability is not a threat. It's a mirror. A mirror that forces us to look at how we treat others, how we uphold justice, and how we respond when the wrong person gets caught doing the wrong thing to someone who finally has the power to say enough. But justice shouldn't depend on who you are. It should exist for everyone, and that's where real change begins. To our listeners, if you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, remember your silence doesn't mean you lack strength. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest truth. And when you stand up, even if your voice shakes, you shift the balance. If you work in a position of influence, whether in law enforcement, education, public service, or business, remember that leadership isn't just about control, it's about responsibility. And when you witness something wrong, the right time to speak is always now. From all of us at US Instructive Stories, we want to thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for being part of this journey. These stories aren't just for entertainment, they're reminders. Reminders to listen closer, to ask harder questions, and to never stop demanding better for ourselves and for each other. If this story moved you, we ask that you don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, start a conversation in your own community. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you powerful stories like this one's stories that challenge, uplift, and remind us of what justice really looks like. Until next time, stay aware, stay strong, and never underestimate the quiet voice in the back of the room. It just might be the one holding everyone accountable.